Hey YouTube, today we'll continue reading in Ripper, and today we'll be reading chapter 2, that starts on page 6. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 2. Surrounded by unsettling sounds, Carver Young struggled to keep his hands still. Hang on, sorry, something popped up on my phone. Surrounded by unsettling sounds, Carver Young struggled to keep his hands still. He had to focus. Had to. He could do this. He wasn't some infant afraid of the dark. If anything, he loved the dark. But the cracks in the attic let the wind run wild. Old papers fluttered like hesitant birds. Musty clothes rustled as if touched by spirits. And then the cleaver, wedged in the ceiling right above him, wobbled. It was too much. He stumbled back, making the floorboards creak. No! If someone downstairs hears me. Cursing himself, he crept back under the blade. It's not going to fall. It's been there for years. No reason it should fall now. Taking a breath, he studied the lock again. The keyhole was thin, the pins that held the cylinder tough to reach. Of course, this would be the only lock in Ellis orphanage that ever gave him trouble. It wasn't his first crime, but it was the only one that could change his life. Breaking into the kitchen or nabbing some school supplies could be forgotten, chalked up to what Miss Petty called youthful indiscretion. This time, though, he could be thrown in jail. Wouldn't Finn and his gang have a great laugh at that? Scrawny Carver locked in the tombs, trapped among murderers and robbers, while Finn, a real thief, stayed free. But wouldn't Sherlock Holmes or Nick Neverson do the same thing? Bend the law to get at the truth? The cleaver creaked again as if eager to punish someone, and so Carver saw it for himself. He thought it was a lie. The little ones used to scare each other. The story went that a nameless boy was caught stealing cookies by Curly the cook. Drunk as a skunk, mad as the devil, Curly grabbed the cleaver and chased the boy up to the attic. But when he raised it to strike, the poor sap went to his knees bawling. The cook relented and hurled it up instead. Maybe it was left as a warning, like the skull and the crossbones on my pirate's treasure. No, it was more like the old Greek legend, the sword of Damocles. How'd it go? Damocles envied a king, so the king offered to switch places. King Damocles was thrilled, and so he looked up and saw a sword over his head, hanging by a thread. He got the point. Fear was the price of power. Was that why Carver's hands shook? Beyond the door were the private files for all the orphans at Ellis. Those who'd left, those who, like him, and had been here over a decade. Carver knew nothing about his own parents. Not their names, not how they looked, not how they lived, or even if they had died. His last name, Young, was something Miss Petty made up, because he was an infant when he arrived. Ever since he'd started picking locks, he thought about coming up here and finding out if there was anything Miss Petty hadn't told him. She was always so hesitant about discussing his past. Now, with the headmistress gone for the day, he had the time he needed, or so he thought. After an hour of trying, the lock would not yield to his collection of bent nails. They were either too thick or the wrong shape, and had no way to bend them now. He stepped back and looked around for anything else he could use. The long, wide space was cramped with helter-skelter boxes, clothing racks and trunks, a graveyard of mementos. A bit of color in the gloom caught his eye. Among some chewed, weathered alphabet blocks sat what was his favorite toy, an old, wind-up cowboy mounted on his horse. It had come from Europe, a rich person's toy, donated because it was old and broken. Miss Petty marveled when Carver was only 5 at the time, fixed it. Cowboy man, he called it. Now 14, he picked it up. The wind-up key turned freely. It was broke again, but maybe it could help him one last time. Using his thickest nail, he pried off the side of the horse. It looked like someone had poured milk inside it years ago, but the pieces were all intact. He could fix it again, but he didn't need a toy. Instead, he pulled out the wire that moved the horse's legs back and forth. It was thin enough, but rust came off between his fingers. It would probably snap. Still, it was worth a try. He bent it carefully and, once satisfied with the shape, slipped it into the keyhole. Slowly he turned it. Something clicked. The cylinder turned. The door swung inward. He had it. Snickering at the cleaver, he moved into a room full of gray file cabinets. It was too dim to read their labels, but he guessed the bottom right drawer would hold X, Y, and Z. When he pulled it open, the dry metal squeaked loudly. It didn't seem right. This should be illegal. The only thing he wanted was his, anyways. He pulled all the files out and carried them into a scant beam of sunlight. As he sifted through the awkward pile, a breeze snatched a bit of paper from the last. Afraid he'd drop the pile if he bent to pick it up, he put his foot on it and left it there as he worked. No X's, but a few W's. Wells, Winfrey, Winters, there it was at the bottom. Young Carver. He sat the pile on an old, steamy trunk and weighed it down with a birdcage. Excited, he opened his file. Nothing. It was empty except for an annex card, the same sort he'd seen in Miss Petty's office, listing the orphan's name and any belongings that had arrived with him. Spaces for the parents had been left blank. It didn't even mention the woman Miss Petty told him had brought him to Ellis as an infant. The card had only one entry in the headmistress's small, neat handwriting. It was dated 1889. A letter had been received from England, from his parents. It didn't say. Carver looked down. The folded paper was still lying under his foot. Dropping his file, he snatched at the small, imperfect rectangle. It was a letter. The paper was thick, the fountain pen ink blotched in spots. The handwriting was harsh, almost garbled. 18 July 1889. Shan't quit, but have to stop for now. Loss. Boss, don't think I've done and gone. I'm not buckled yet, and the knife's still nice and sharp for more grand work, but it's my blood this time, and it still flows. Thought she died too quick, have our one and only, but no, he'd be 8 now, and I hear he has a cut ear on the shoulder for me to find him by. Same color, too, a liking for the same job, too. I'll bet once he gets to play my games. But that will have to wait. Try not to miss me. Yours truly. He read it again, then again. The fourth time, pieces began to make sense. Thought she died too quick, to have our one and only, but no, he'd be 8 now. I hear he has a cut ear on the shoulder. The writer thought his son died in childbirth, along with his wife. Carver was 8 in 1889, and he had an ear-shaped birthmark. The letter was written by his father. Carver's father had tried to come for him. What if he was still alive? What if his father was out there still, trying to find him? If you want to hear Chapter 3 of Ripper, look for my next video.